You thought doing everything right would make her stay. You changed the way you spoke, softened your edges, made yourself more agreeable, more attentive. You listened. You remembered the little things. You made sacrifices. You gave her the space she asked for, the affection she needed, the patience she didn't always deserve. You became everything she said she wanted. And then she left. No explanation that made sense. No real closure. Just the quiet, brutal shift from warmth to distance, from love to indifference, from "you're everything I ever wanted" to silence so cold it cracked something inside you. And you're left replaying everything, searching for the exact moment where it all turned. What no one told you is this: when you try too hard to become someone else for her, you stop being the man she was attracted to in the first place. That's the paradox that breaks most men, and no one warns you. Because this isn't about being a good partner, it's about being a predictable one, and predictability is the slow death of attraction. At first, it feels like you're winning. You notice how her mood changes when you agree with her more. You see her soften when you apologize first. Even when you're not wrong, you feel her calm when you abandon your plans to prioritize hers. You're rewarded, in small ways, for being less you. But then, something shifts. She doesn't seem as interested in what you say anymore. She stops asking for your opinion. She makes decisions without checking with you. The space you gave her becomes distance. The affection you offered becomes an expectation. Your effort is now background noise. And slowly, invisibly, she begins to lose respect. Not because you weren't good enough, but because you were too willing. You became available, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, energetically. You stopped being a mystery. You stopped having weight. She could read you like a book. And no matter how good the book is, once someone knows every page by heart, they stop reaching for it. It's not malice, it's nature. People crave polarity. Masculine and feminine energy dance in tension, not in comfort. The man who centers his identity around pleasing will always be replaced by the man who keeps his center, even when she pushes against it. But here's what's cruel. She may have asked for you to change. She may have begged for softness, for understanding, for compromise. And in trying to give it to her, you erased the very edges that made her feel drawn to you. The sharpness, the unpredictability, the sovereignty. You became her emotional mirror, reflecting everything she needed instead of standing in your own truth. She didn't want a reflection. She wanted a presence. There's a psychological phenomenon most men never see coming: the nice guy collapse. It happens when a man tries so hard to meet every emotional need that he becomes invisible in the process. Women don't fall out of love because men change. They fall out of love because the change kills the polarity. Think about the man she couldn't stop talking about before you. He probably wasn't perfect. He probably made her cry. He probably ignored her text, did his own thing, had his own life. And she chased. She obsessed. She tried to understand him, to fix him, because he didn't bend, because he stood somewhere she couldn't fully reach. You showed up and gave her the emotional safety she said she wanted. And in doing so, you gave her everything. And the moment someone has everything, they don't have to want anything. Now she walks away and says, "You're such a good guy. I hope you find someone who appreciates you." And you stand there hollow, wondering how being good could leave you so alone. You thought goodness was the key, but what she craved was power. Not the abusive kind, the magnetic kind, the kind that comes from a man who knows who he is and doesn't apologize for it. Somewhere along the way, you replaced power with pleasing. You stopped being a source of gravity and started orbiting around her mood, her needs, her validation. You lost your center. And the man without a center can never be truly desired. He's safe, he's reliable, he's forgettable. There's a reason so many relationships die in silence. It's not the fights, it's not the betrayal, it's the slow erosion of polarity, the death of unpredictability, the decay of mystery. And that happens when a man trades his identity for affection. Women may not always know how to explain it, but they feel it. They feel when your eyes stop holding secrets, when your presence becomes predictable, when your emotions are no longer rooted in conviction, but in the hope of being accepted, when every yes you say is driven by the fear of losing them. And here's the part that stings the most. Once she senses that fear, the game is already over, because the man who fears losing her has already lost himself. And once she feels that, once she knows you're molding yourself to fit her emotional temperature, the dynamic shifts permanently. You're no longer the man she was drawn to. You're the man she controls without even trying. That's not her fault. It's biology. It's psychology. It's the unspoken language of attraction that doesn't operate by logic or fairness. She may still care. She may still speak kindly. She may still hold your hand. But the part of her that wants you, that respects you, is gone. And you'll feel it. In her tone, in her distance, in her delayed responses, in her lack of enthusiasm, in how she pulls away when you lean in, and worst of all, in how she acts confused when you ask what's wrong. You thought she wanted the man who listens, the man who adjusts, the man who never lets her down, and you gave her exactly that. But what she was really drawn to was the man who didn't need her approval to breathe. That's where your power lives, not in being chosen, but in knowing you don't need to be. The tragedy is that most men don't even realize they're bleeding out emotionally until it's far too late. By the time you feel her pulling away, by the time the silence grows louder than the conversations ever were, you've already been swallowed whole by a dynamic that rewards you for shrinking. At first, the validation feels intoxicating. She notices your efforts. She tells her friends you're different. She compares you to her exes, always with a tone of relief. You feel like you're finally doing it right. You're the man she's been waiting for. But deep down, something begins to shift in you. You start walking on emotional eggshells. You start measuring your words. You stop disagreeing. You call less because you don't want to bother. You wait for her signals before you act. And without even realizing it, you stop leading the relationship. And when a man stops leading, the energy dies. Not because women need to be controlled, but because women are wired to respond to certainty. It's not about dominance, it's about direction. If you surrender your ability to hold direction, you surrender the very force that makes her feel safe and magnetized in the first place. The man who adapts too much eventually erases himself. Let's get brutally honest. Most men don't become too nice out of kindness. They do it out of fear. The fear of conflict, the fear of rejection, the fear of being alone. And fear is a scent that repels attraction. It's not what you say that makes her lose interest. It's what you radiate when you say it. If you're saying yes to keep her, she can feel that. If you're apologizing to avoid a reaction, she can sense that. If you're agreeing just to prevent tension, she'll start testing even more just to feel something. And that's when it starts. The subtle, emotional test. The ones she doesn't even realize she's running. She changes plans last minute to see if you'll flinch. She makes passive comments to see if you'll react. She gives you less affection to see if you'll chase. It's not because she's cruel. It's because on some primal level, she needs to know if your spine is real, or if it only stands upright when she's smiling. And most men fail those tests, not because they're weak, but because they're conditioned to think that pleasing equals love. So they explain themselves. They ask for reassurance. They become emotional performers in a play they didn't write, hoping to earn a standing ovation they'll never receive. There's a painful but liberating truth here. The more you try to prove yourself, the more invisible you become. Think about the men you've seen who always had women orbiting around them. Were they the nicest, the most agreeable, the most available? Rarely. They were the men who had direction, who had a life, who had opinion, who had standards. They didn't ask for permission to be themselves. They didn't shrink in the face of feminine emotion. They stood still while the storm passed. And that's why women trusted them. Because a man who cannot anchor himself will never make a woman feel anchored. One of the greatest illusions that destroys masculine identity is the belief that compromise is always good. It's not. Compromise becomes poison when it costs you your truth. When you abandon your needs to avoid discomfort, you're not compromising, you're submitting, and submission always kills attraction. She may not say it out loud. In fact, she might even encourage it in the beginning. But the longer you stay in that dynamic, the more she feels something is off. She won't be able to explain it. She might even feel guilty about it, but the truth will settle deep in her body. She doesn't feel you anymore. You're present, but you're not there. She's connected to your efforts, not your essence, and that's not enough. Because effort without identity becomes emotional labor, not emotional leadership. And it's leadership she's drawn to, not in a patriarchal sense, in an energetic sense, the ability to hold your frame when things get uncertain, the strength to say no when it's easier to say yes, the clarity to walk away if the relationship begins to require your self-betrayal. That's the version of you she fell for. The version that knew who he was before she came along. The version that didn't flinch at silence, that didn't explain himself every time she was upset, that didn't beg for closeness when things got cold. The version of you who didn't need her love to feel lovable. But somewhere along the line, that version started fading, slowly, quietly. You started adjusting more than leading. You started asking more than deciding. You started fearing more than trusting. And the more you did that, the more you placed the entire emotional burden of the relationship on her shoulders, without even realizing. And no matter how strong she is, she resents that burden. She starts feeling like the emotional parent, the guide, the one who has to constantly decode your energy, reassure your worth, validate your identity. And the moment a woman feels like your emotional mother, the romance dies. Not because she doesn't care, but because the dynamic has inverted. She wants a partner, not a project. So she starts withdrawing. She stops initiating. She avoids vulnerability. She gets busy. She texts less. You feel the change, but can't understand why. You try harder. You become sweeter, more attentive, more gentle. But nothing works, because she's not looking for more of your effort. She's looking for your center. A man who won't collapse just because she's having a bad day. A man who doesn't need to be needed to feel like a man. A man who can hold the fire of a relationship without losing himself in the flames. And that's the man you were before you forgot who you were. So how do you reclaim him? Not by becoming cold, not by pretending not to care, not by playing games, but by remembering that love is not about proving your worth, it's about embodying it. A man of worth doesn't chase validation. He radiates presence. He doesn't rush to fix every emotional wave. He observes it, holds space, and responds with grounded truth. He doesn't try to become her everything. He remains his own man and invites her to join his world. She didn't want to be your savior. She wanted to be your witness. And the only way she can witness you is if you show up, unapologetically, fully, without performance, without fear, with clarity in your words, with honesty in your spine, with the quiet, unshakable power of a man who knows his value, with or without her approval. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do as a man is succeed in becoming exactly what she says she wants. Not because she's dishonest, but because desire doesn't live in logic. It's not found in checklists, birthday surprises, or carefully worded texts. It lives in tension, in polarity, in the subtle electricity that happens when a man holds his ground, and a woman feels it without words. So when you start adapting too perfectly, remembering every detail, answering every call immediately, never disagreeing, showing up exactly how she wants, you think you're winning her over. But what you're really doing is stepping further and further away from the essence that made her feel pulled toward you in the first place. That spark didn't come from you being convenient. It came from you being complete. And when a man gives up his completeness to keep the connection alive, it doesn't strengthen the bond. It strangles it, slowly, silently, until one day she looks at you with the same face, but the eyes are different. The admiration is gone. The fire has dimmed. She doesn't even understand why she's drifting away, but she is, and you feel it in your bones. You keep thinking, I'm doing everything right. Why is this happening? That question is the tragedy. Because you are doing everything right, according to the script, according to the version of love that tells men to be soft, accommodating, predictable, and safe. But attraction was never born in safety. It was born in the dance between certainty and mystery, between presence and distance, between knowing she's loved and still wondering what part of your soul she hasn't yet touched. Predictability kills seduction. Certainty without tension dries desire. And it's not because she's ungrateful. It's not because she's impossible to please. It's because desire needs space to breathe. If she feels like she's fully mapped out your emotional landscape, like there's no edge, no challenge, no masculine core resisting the gravitational pull of her moods, the energy dies. And once that death sets in, the relationship may continue, but it will limp. Let's be blunt. A woman cannot deeply desire a man who disappears just to keep the peace. She might appreciate him. She might even love him. But desire? That lives somewhere else. It lives in the presence of a man who doesn't abandon himself when she's upset, who doesn't trade his truth for comfort, who can say, "No, I don't agree," with love in his voice and stillness in his chest, who doesn't seek her approval like a lost boy begging to be chosen. That's the difference between attraction and affection. Affection is what you get when you're pleasing. Attraction is what you get when you're unapologetically whole. And the irony is brutal, because the more you sacrifice to be perfect, the more you become invisible. Not because she doesn't see you, but because what she felt for you can no longer recognize itself. The energy that moved through her when you were unpredictable, when you had strong opinions, when you stood your ground, it's gone, replaced by routine, by safety, by comfort. She didn't fall for comfort, she fell for contrast. That doesn't mean you become cold or distant. It means you return to the part of you that doesn't flinch under pressure, the part that doesn't edit himself to avoid tension, the part that refuses to become emotionally neutered in the name of being good. That's not goodness. That's self-abandonment. And you feel the cost of that abandonment in every interaction. You become more polite, but less respected, more agreeable, but less heard, more accommodating, but less desired. And deep down, a rage begins to grow. Not a loud rage, but a silent one. The kind that whispers, "Why am I not enough?" while your eyes scan her face for a sign that she still wants you. But what you really want is to be wanted for who you are, not for how well you perform. And you can't be wanted for who you are if you no longer are. That's the paradox that breaks men. They think their devotion is the ultimate proof of love. And it is, if it's rooted in truth. But when devotion becomes desperation, when presence becomes performance, when love becomes submission, you're no longer a man standing with her. You're a shadow trailing behind her. And no woman wants to fall in love with a shadow. She wants to feel your presence like a mountain, calm, unmoved, strong. She wants to feel the gravity of your being when she walks into a room. Not because you say the right things, but because you carry a truth that doesn't bend in the wind. Most men have never been taught how to carry that truth. They were raised to be gentle, polite, non-confrontational, and there's nothing wrong with kindness. But kindness without a spine is just weakness pretending to be virtue. And women can feel the difference. So here's the shift. Stop trying to impress her. Start respecting yourself. Start leading with your value. Start living with your boundary. Start saying what you actually mean, not what you think she wants to hear. And if she doesn't like it, good. Now you know the truth sooner. Now you can walk away with your dignity intact, instead of clinging to a fantasy where love means always being agreeable. True masculinity is not about dominance. It's about sovereignty. It's about not needing anyone to complete you and inviting someone to compliment you. It's about walking beside her, not chasing behind her. It's about saying, "This is who I am. This is what I stand for. And if you want to build something with me, it has to start with truth." That truth will cost you some women, but it will attract the one who doesn't want a puppet. She wants a partner, And when you become that man, not because you're trying to impress her, but because you've finally remembered who you are, everything changes. The energy in the room shifts. The tone of her voice softens. The tension that once felt like a threat becomes a doorway into deeper intimacy, because she finally feels what she's been craving all along. A man who can hold her fire without extinguishing his own. There's something almost intoxicating about being needed. When she looks at you with those eyes that silently plead, when she turns to you for comfort, protection, direction, you feel powerful. It validates you. You feel like the man you always hoped to become. But the problem begins when that sense of importance becomes your source of identity. Because the moment you start needing to be needed, you're no longer leading the relationship, you're feeding off it. You lose your balance. Your emotional state becomes tied to how much attention she gives. Your mood shifts based on whether she's warm or distant. You start checking your phone more often, replaying her tone in your head, wondering if you said something wrong. You're not grounded anymore. You're reactive. Her silence becomes your storm. And at first, it's subtle. You tell yourself you're just being attentive, just caring, just showing up. But over time, that attentiveness turns into overinvestment. You begin to abandon your own plans, dilute your opinions, walk on eggshells, all because you've convinced yourself that being close to her requires being more agreeable, more available, more accommodating. But here's the catch. Availability without depth is suffocating. When you become too accessible, too present, too eager, you eliminate the very dynamic that keeps a woman emotionally engaged. You remove the edge, the sense of uncertainty, the feeling that she still has to earn your attention, that your presence is not something to be taken for granted, but something of value. And that's not manipulation. That's reality. Even she knows it deep down. No one cherishes what they don't have to reach for. No one is drawn to what always says yes. And no woman is ignited by a man whose entire emotional world revolves around hers. You weren't born to orbit around anyone. And yet, so many men fall into this trap. Because we've been told over and over again that the more we give, the more we'll be loved. That the more present we are, the more secure the bond will become. But the truth is much colder and far more freeing. Being present doesn't mean being predictable. Loving deeply doesn't mean losing yourself. And being committed doesn't mean constant availability. Because true connection isn't built on how much of yourself you give up. It's built on how much of yourself you're willing to protect. When a man has no emotional boundaries, he becomes soft clay in a woman's hands. She may shape him, mold him, even enjoy the power for a while. But eventually, she'll begin to resent the very thing she created. Because deep inside every woman, there's a craving for a man she can lean on, not one she has to emotionally carry. So what does that actually look like? It looks like a man who doesn't drop everything the second she texts. It looks like someone who maintains his workout, his business, his solitude, regardless of her mood swings or attention. It looks like not explaining yourself constantly, not justifying every action, not trying to prove your love through performance. It means you lead with energy, not apology. You are there, but you are not everywhere. And in doing so, you reintroduce an ancient rhythm into the dynamic, one that's been lost in the noise of modern emotional codependence. You remind her that you are a man with a center, that you are not a project she can redesign, that you're a storm with its own direction, and she can either walk beside you or step out of the way. This is where polarity returns. This is where respect grows again. Because she doesn't just want your affection, she wants to feel your presence. And that presence can't be felt if you're constantly chasing. It's only felt when you stop running after her emotional cues and start listening to your own. Ironically, the less you try to control her perception of you, the more she becomes drawn to it. The moment you stop adjusting yourself for approval, you become intriguing again. The mystery returns. The tension breathes. She begins to wonder, not out of insecurity, but out of admiration. What makes you so grounded, so self-contained, so undeniably whole? She stops testing you, not because she's changed, but because you have. The man she once pushed around emotionally, she now has to earn again. And this isn't about playing game. It's about emotional gravity. When you lose your center, you become weightless, easy to move, easy to shake. But when you reclaim it, your silence becomes powerful. Your stillness becomes commanding. And every word you speak, it lands. Women don't want to lead your emotional journey. They want to feel safe in it. And safety doesn't come from submission. It comes from strength, from direction, from a man who doesn't apologize for having a spine. So the next time she pulls away, don't chase. The next time she tests your patience, don't react. The next time she withdraws her affection, don't panic. Sit with yourself. Breathe. Let her feel the weight of your calm. Let her witness the rarest thing a man can offer in today's world: emotional discipline. Not because you're playing hard to get, but because you are already whole. And whole men don't crumble under emotional pressure. They don't beg for love that feels off. They don't mold themselves into someone they're not. They choose themselves first. And in doing so, they become the very thing that others choose without hesitation. You think you've finally cracked the code. You've adjusted your behavior, softened your edges, listened harder, shown up more. You've bent over backwards to avoid conflict, to meet her emotional needs, to demonstrate that you're nothing like the men who came before you. You've become the man she said she wanted, and yet, somehow, she's colder than ever, more distant, less impressed, almost bored. That's the paradox. The closer you get to her checklist, the more invisible you become. Because in trying to be everything she ever asked for, you stopped being the man she was once curious about, the man she chased, even in subtle ways, the man who had mystery, tension, unpredictability. You see, no woman falls in love with perfection. She falls in love with the challenge, with the unspoken thrill of not quite knowing where she stands. Not because she wants drama, but because it makes her feel alive. Desire is not born in safety. It's born in polarity. You may have heard her say, "I just want a nice guy who communicates well, is emotionally available, supportive, calm, open, vulnerable." And you believed her. You tried to be that. But what she really wants, what makes her feel something in her bones, is not the man who asks how her day went 10 times. It's the man who leads with quiet certainty, who doesn't need her approval to breathe, who can hold her emotions without absorbing them. It's not the man who pleases. It's the man who grounds. Think about how many men you know who gave everything, only to be left confused when she walked away. They planned the perfect dates. They opened up. They sent flowers. They were supportive, sensitive, kind. And still, she left. Why? Because those things, in excess, become too easy to consume, too digestible, too familiar. And familiarity kills seduction. Comfort erodes admiration. She stopped seeing you as a source of energy and started seeing you as emotional furniture. The truth is brutal. When she feels she's figured you out, she disconnects. So how do you flip that dynamic? How do you stop being the man who gives and gives until there's nothing left, and start being the man who commands energy without even speaking? You stop performing. You stop trying to impress her. You stop living in reaction to her emotions, her moods, her patterns. And instead, you root yourself so deeply in your values, your mission, your internal code, that she either joins your world or watches you walk away from hers. Because what keeps a woman emotionally engaged isn't how much she can control you, it's how deeply she can respect you. Respect is the gatekeeper of attraction. If she senses that you're the type of man who betrays himself to keep her, she will lose respect. If she feels that your love comes with self-erasure, she will lose interest. And if she learns that she can break your boundaries with tears or silence, she will never trust your strength. Women don't consciously think this way, but they feel it deeply. They know when they've overstepped and you folded. They know when your silence is fear, not power. They know when your empathy is actually disguised desperation. And once they've seen you flinch too many times, the attraction begins to rot. So the most powerful thing you can do isn't to love her harder. It's to love yourself harder in her presence. That means saying no. That means walking away when the dynamic feels manipulative. That means not needing her to validate your worth with affection. It means you show her, without ever raising your voice, that your love is a gift, not a weakness. And ironically, it is in this space of quiet strength that she will feel safest. Not because you gave her the world, but because you never lost yourself trying to. Take this in. You are not meant to be her emotional oxygen. You are meant to be her mirror, reflecting her beauty, yes, but never losing your frame. The frame is everything. Without it, she doesn't feel your presence. She doesn't trust your center. She doesn't feel you. And that's what she's craving. Not perfection, not performance. Presence. Not the man who explains himself in paragraphs. The man who speaks with his energy. The one who doesn't chase when she pulls away. The one who stays calm when she tests boundaries. The one who can walk away from chaos because he refuses to abandon his peace. That's the man she can't forget, because he's the one she could never fully predict. And unpredictability, when rooted in integrity, becomes irresistible. This is where true power begins, when you no longer ask, "What does she want me to be?" and start asking, "Who am I when no one's watching?" Because that man, he doesn't lose sleep over rejection. He doesn't collapse under mixed signals. He doesn't shrink when love feels uncertain. He leads. He listens to himself first. And the woman who sees that, really sees that, won't walk away. She'll step closer, not because you demanded it, but because your energy gave her no other choice. So next time you find yourself thinking, "I did everything right, why did she leave?" Remember, maybe you did everything she asked for, but you stopped being the man who once held her fascination. Desire doesn't thrive in obedience. It thrives in tension, in depth, in presence. You don't need to become more of what she wants. You need to become more of who you really are. Because that man, the one who doesn't flinch, who doesn't perform, who doesn't disappear into the relationship, is the one no woman can ever truly leave behind.